Well, it's the summer now, friends. I heard today that in Phoenix, Arizona, they're getting excited because next week they might get a few days when it doesn't get to 110, which it's been for a month. Well, here at First Unitarian, we are in the middle of our summer series, trying to keep everyone cool. And every week, an episode of the much-loved radio show, This American Life, is sent out to everyone. And every week, one of us stands up here and shames you. Shames you for not listening, not doing your homework. Well, those days are over. I'm not going to do that today. I'm just going to retell the whole story for you instead. Yeah, that's right. I want to watch a video, teacher. Okay, no problem. I'm that teacher. I'm here to tell you that I do not like Peter Pan. I mean, is he really anybody's favorite literary character? You've got Charlotte from Charlotte's Web. You've got, take your pick. I don't know why that's the one I got. And even less than I like the original or dramatic character, do I like any of the modern takes on this character that keep coming around, recycled every few years in stage and film, and some adolescent male child actor flies around from world to world, kidnapping children, and then gets indignant with a wonderful, kind, slightly codependent woman, Wendy, when she dares grow old in beauty and in grace. We love Wendy. I can take or leave it, but mostly I leave it. And that is why I so dearly loved this week's episode of This American Life. The opening story is about a production of Peter Pan that the storyteller saw when he was in the 10th grade. And as he puts it, it was a production that stretched a little farther than any of its participants were really equipped to go. Central to the production was the rare and complicated rigging apparatus used to make the actors appear to fly on stage. And the level of preparation those operating the rigging had or didn't, the storyteller explains that when Peter Pan makes his first appearance, he sprinkles the darling children with the magical fairy dust, which is meant to help them alight into the air as if by some miracle. But instead, the children suddenly lurch from the bed up into the air, where they just sort of hang there still, like spiders or puppets. Then they start to swing in circles, in gyres that are widening and widening, and the confidence in those running the machines meant to hold them is starting to wane. And as they're being now flung around, the littlest boy is sailing a little more because of his lack of mass, and a little wider than the others, and the audience kind of sees it coming when he does an enormous splat into an enormous wooden wardrobe on the stage. Now he's clearly dazed, likely hurt. And then immediately he's flung up into the rafters, into the space above the stage where the lights are hung, before plummeting straight down to the stage and being jerked to a stop just before he hits the floor. And you say nothing. The audience says nothing. Then in the next scene, Neverland is finally set. The beauty of the landscape is revealed in all its psychedelicness and rare plants that are on the stage. The audience sort of takes a moment, sort of takes it in, a breath amid the insanity that they all just witnessed. And they think maybe now it's going to be okay. And then in the rafters appear the children and Peter Pan. Their approach to the stage is at a 45-degree angle. And as they pitch toward the floor very quickly, they land on it like lead sinkers. Now, because the rigging is still attached and because someone was told they're supposed to move in circles, the darling children are then dragged across the stage, wiping out all of the psychedelic wonder on the set. And then it started to happen. They started to laugh. It was not long before the audience was roaring at every mistake. Even the old people had just quit being nice. There is a certifiable roar coming from the audience. In the end, when one of the actors hurts himself climbing down a rope ladder and falls 15 or 20 feet into the auditorium, someone finally pulls the alarm. But the alarm is really an air raid siren to be heard for 5 miles around. And it's located right above the theater where everyone's sitting. So the fire department enters, tending to the injured actor. The director is yelling to the actors that the show must go on and you have to keep going. And the audience is screaming and screaming with laughter, standing in their seats, wanting more and more and more. It was a fiasco. Have a good day. That's all I've got. What do you think of when you hear the word fiasco? Well, even the origin of the word is a bit of, a fiasco. Sort of an international disagreement between Italy and France over the origin of this word. There's literally these online disagreements with foreign word nerds about where it all comes from, and I won't bore you with it all. But in the radio show, we hear something as a fiasco when the entire social order of the situation breaks down. In the case of this ill-fated production, the contract of theater, that actors and the crew are there to transport the audience to some other place, and the audience is there with agreement to not interrupt the production except with signs of appreciation like laughter and applause. This contract was completely voided, and what was left was the mayhem of children being dragged around the stage like so many pajamaed mops. And the audience totally losing their mind and laughing themselves into breathless stitches. A fiasco, to be sure. Now, laughing when we shouldn't, a great American pastime, is one kind of fiasco. I'm sure we've all been there. I remember I was in traffic court once as a defendant, not defending anyone. And I was reading a book by the late, great Carrie Fisher, who was a much underrated novelist, I have to say. She was great. So I'm reading this book, and out of nowhere comes this scene, and I burst out laughing right as another defendant is getting sentenced to something. Attorney FitzGerald will have no more outbursts in the court. Anyway. And it comes from this kind of primal joy, this laughing when we shouldn't. It's difficult to suppress. But it rarely turns into a fiasco like we heard. It doesn't quite indicate the loss of all of the social order. But we are surrounded by fiascos right now, right? I'm just going to pick one. This week, a state trooper medic, reported about the way he was being ordered to treat those in the migration process. He reported that his superiors, Texas officials at the Mexico-Texas border, ordered other troopers to push people, including children, back down the hills of the banks of the Rio Grande into the water, and ordered troopers to refuse water to those who thirsted. One 4-year-old passed out and had to be revived. And a 19-year-old miscarried a child after being cut loose from the barbed wire fence where she was ensnared. None of the actions or events are being denied by any of the officials from among the state troopers. Some lawmakers are publicly in support of these actions and the policies that led to them. Policies that are meant specifically to harm people. It sure feels like a fiasco. It sure seems like a breakdown in the social order to me. But is it? Is it a breakdown when this is the social order that some people want? Is it a breakdown when cruelty becomes a state policy, state-sponsored cruelty? Is it a breakdown when it's all going to plan? The situation, like so many we face every day, might be a fiasco for some of us, where social order seems like it's breaking down, seems like an utter miscarriage of justice is taking place, but for others, it's the plan. But whose? When everything seems to be falling apart, some of us just order ice cream. I get it. I do that. Or binge Netflix, or some combination of both. I'm just imagining here. But if you're Irish, like my people, you might do all these things and also write some apocalyptic poetry. In our reading, Yeats writes, "Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart, the center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity." A gyre is a vortex or a whirlpool. It is circling weather or water that spells danger for anyone, anything in its vicinity. This opening line and the rest of the poem came to the author near the end of the First World War, where citizens of the world saw for the first time, many of them, the horrors that could be loosed on the world by mankind itself. The young men from some entire villages died during that war. And the ones who returned were haunted by what they witnessed, and many bore scars and changes to their bodies, the likes of which no one had ever seen. And at the same time, in his homeland of Ireland was coming to terms with this, the beginning of the Irish War for Independence started, and a tremendous flu outbreak was infecting more than half of the people in his country. International conflict, rising tensions here at home, and a great illness facing a nation. That was the early part of the 20th century, and he wondered if any of us would see the next. He evokes this image like a nightmare. The darkness drops again, but now I know that 20 centuries of stony sleep were vexed to nightmare by a rocking cradle. And what rough beast, its hour come round at last, slouches toward Bethlehem to be born. The 20 centuries are the time that this messenger from God, born in Bethlehem, so many in this country, so many in this world believe may be coming again, was sleeping. And now, seeing the world and all it has become, through war, disaster, and disease, the poet imagines that powerful messenger is waking and is not happy. The question at the end that is so haunting is, what is the world going to get of God's judgment this time around? What rough beast, its hour come round at last, slouches toward Bethlehem to be born? I think about this question more than you might think. I don't profess to be a Christian, though I'm often confused for one. But when something like this, like the report that came to us about the orders at the borders, I can't help but ask if a messenger coming from a loving God, or any God really, in any faith that I can think of, was to walk up and see an armed person pushing a 4-year-old down a hill into water laid with traps, or even just see someone refusing drink to those who thirst. Seriously, what do we think that messenger is going to do? How would that situation be explained to anyone who preaches love, who preaches welcome, who professes some kind of mercy? I know this is a Unitarian church, but it's been more than 100 degrees for a month. The seas in Florida are boiling. And no, they don't deserve it, but it's boiling. They deserve it a little. Anyway. I'm going to get in trouble for that. People are celebrating temperatures that dip below 110, and people here are celebrating not being in places where the temperature is 110, because here it's 107. So part of me is wondering what a second coming of that messenger would mean, and it might be coming soon. Part of me is asking, what would a UU do? Some people ask, what would Jesus do? But since Jesus was pretty Unitarian, in fact, the original Unitarian, I might argue, the question stands. And so we turn to what Anne Lamott offers so generously in her reading. Her description of children and her life, I imagine just taking things from her house and giving them to people on the street. It's so vivid. Where's my cookie jar? What? She helps paint the picture of this litter of children just lying on the floor with their classmates. And then she tells us how that peace and innocence ends with the teaching of subtraction. The sure knowledge we are taught that one thing can be more than something else, that something can be less than something else, especially by simply just removing something from the equation. I was trained as a lawyer, so I only know addition and multiplication for billing. I don't understand all the subtraction and division stuff. But when we're on the road to exceptionalism, that is when we start subtracting, taking away. And that road requires that we let go of things, that we stand out, that we differentiate ourselves from others, not in the healthy way that we differentiate, but in the standing out kind of separate way. We take those things that don't serve this aim and we put them in a drawer, she says. The world doesn't want you to be one of, it wants you rather to be more than. We are told to start excelling, which leads to perfectionism, which can only be fed by more perfectionism, although we love a good confectionism, until you are a doomed person, she says. Oof, who is choosing these mean readings? What minister is doing this? But sometimes we got to hear these things, friends. Whether it is Yeats telling us to watch out for the dead-eyed half-person, half-lion stalking the blood-red desert because what is coming next could be rough, or whether we hear from someone who pays a lot of attention to children that the doom of a person starts not when things finally fall apart, but when we begin the plan to hold ourselves apart from others for our gain. That is the fiasco. The fiasco we have is the belief that I'm alone ever in any way, or that I am better or greater than anyone else. I'm not saying I'm better than anyone else, but I'll be damned if I'm not just as good, said Aunt Eller in Oklahoma. That's right. The fiasco is that I am separate from you or you are separate from me. The fiasco is subtraction. The fiasco is belittlement. The fiasco is disconnection, dislocation, discrimination, dissembling. It is disinformation because we are in this all together, and we have always been. If this is how life must be, I don't want to grow up. If grown people plan ways to harm others, I don't want to grow up. If that's all part of the plan, I won't grow up, never grow up, never grow up, not me. Right. Because that kind of differentiation from others is the root of the greatest evils the world has ever known, from World War I to the Irish War for Independence, to every differentiation or every different piece of betterment over others and difference that the world has ever seen. So it pains me to admit that as creepy as the idea is rendered on stage, as joyful as it was to hear about the production falling apart, the essential lesson to try to hold on to the possibility, to the warm affection, to the togetherness that children have in that litter can prevent the doom of relentless striving for individual perfection. It really can. We should all be teaching Sunday school. All right? Anne Lamott tells us the counterintuitive thing to do in the face of the danger and chaos is to find mercy within yourself and operate from that place. Mercy looks like a lot of things. Like water to those thirsting, like a solution to the end of suffering, reaching a hand out to a stranger to hold. Sometimes it looks like an air siren chasing people out of a theater who want to see more and more of a fiasco. And sometimes it starts with a group of people loving one another because of their difference, not in spite of it. Working together for the common good and holding each other in love. That's how I want to grow up. That's how I want this place. That's how I see this faith teaching me, teaching us to grow every single day. In compassion, in love, in mercy, right toward the second star to the right, and straight on till morning. May it ever be so. Blessed be, and amen.